You were promised that by 30, everything would click into place. A real salary, real savings, a plan that actually made sense. Nobody warned you what to do if you ended up behind instead. Most mornings you glance at your bank balance and the figure rarely moves the way you hoped. $412. No disaster caused it. No single mistake either. Just years of spending a little more than you saved, one paycheck at a time. This is where your 30s really begin. Not with the roadmap you were handed as a kid, but with the number you keep avoiding right now. Your starting net worth is debt, not savings. The banking app shows a red figure at the top, and you've stopped opening it first thing in the morning because you already have a rough idea what it says. $6,140. It's been creeping upward since March, a little at a time. Groceries, guama, and emergency root canal you're still paying off in installments, you barely notice until the statement lands in your inbox. The interest rate sits at nearly 27%, a number you've stared at so many times it stopped registering as math and started feeling more like weather, something that simply happens to you. Your student loan servicer emails every month like clockwork. Roughly $31,000 remaining on a degree you use daily and rarely think about the cost of anymore, except on the 15th, when the payment clears and takes a bite out of whatever's left in checking. Your friend texts you a link to a bachelorette weekend in Nashville. Flights, an Airbnb split 4 ways, a rooftop dinner someone already put a deposit down on. She works in pharmaceutical sales and drives a leased SUV she upgrades every 3 years without seeming to think twice about it. You say you're in before doing the math, then do the math in the rideshare home. And the number makes your stomach drop, the specific kind of drop that isn't panic, just recognition. You're 29. If you looked it up and you have late at night, the way people search symptoms they're afraid of, you'd learn most Americans under 35 sit around $39,000 in net worth. Not because they're geniuses, not necessarily because they got lucky or had help or started earlier than you did. You don't know which explanation applies to you. You just know your own number right now is negative, and that's a different kind of math than everyone else seems to be doing. There's a version of the story that would be easier to watch. You visibly drowning in crisis, something dramatic enough to justify starting over. That's not what this is. This is a decent job, a decent apartment, a decent life that simply has more flowing out than coming in every month, in amounts too small to notice until you add them together. The interest alone on your credit card costs you more this year than your last 3 haircuts combined. And you've never actually sat down to calculate that, because calculating it would mean admitting you already know. You go to Nashville anyway. It's a genuinely good weekend, the kind you don't regret even after the statement arrives. You take a photo of the 4 of you on the rooftop, skyline behind you, everyone looking like their life is working out fine. Back home on Sunday night, you sit on the edge of the bed with your laptop and finally open the app you've been dodging all week. The number isn't 412 anymore, it's lower. You sit with it for a second, not shocked, just tired in that specific way that comes from watching something you already expected happen anyway. You don't cry about it, you don't spiral, you just close the laptop, and somewhere underneath the exhaustion, something quieter starts forming. Not a plan yet. Just the first flicker of being done watching the number move in only one direction. Monday, lunch break, you sit in your car in the parking garage instead of eating because you told yourself you'd make this call today, and you know if you don't do it now, you never will. The credit card company picks up faster than expected. You ask in the flattest voice you can manage whether anything can be done about the rate. The rep sounds bored, types for a while, knocks it down a few points. Not a miracle, just enough that you'll notice the difference on the next statement. You start listing every fixed cost you have, rent, the car payment, phone, insurance, the card's minimum, and multiply the total by 6 because somewhere you read that's what a real emergency fund should cover. The number that comes out the other end is bigger than you want it to be. That same afternoon, still sitting in the car, you open a high-yield savings account paying just over 4%, since your regular checking account pays almost nothing. For the first time in a while, that feels like a decision instead of an accident. A coworker a few desks over invites you to happy hour every Thursday, and most Thursdays you go because you're not trying to vanish from your own life, but you start noticing the tab differently now. Not panicking, just aware the way you're aware of a speed limit sign you've driven past 100 times. Some nights you order the second beer, other nights you skip it, And nobody at the table notices the difference, which is sort of the point. You start packing lunch 2 days a week now, not every day, because every day felt like punishment, and punishment never lasts. 2 days a week is something you can actually sustain. You take the sandwich money, call it $11 twice a week, and send it straight at the balance, along with whatever's left over after the paycheck clears. It's not dramatic. It's the same small motion repeated week after week, and none of it looks like progress from the outside. A coworker mentions she's saving for a luxury watch she's had bookmarked for months, somewhere north of $6,000, and you nod along, genuinely happy for her, without mentioning that your version of a reward right now is watching a number shrink instead of grow. 2 different games, and you don't resent hers for being more fun to talk about. Months pass this way. The balance drops, not in a straight line, there's a car repair in there, a friend's wedding gift you couldn't skip, but the overall direction holds. You stop opening the app with dread and start opening it the way you'd check a scoreboard, curious now instead of afraid. One Tuesday night, after transferring another $80 over, you notice something small and strange. You didn't feel anything doing it, no pride, no relief, nothing. It's just what you do now, the same way you brush your teeth without thinking about it. Somewhere in that sameness, the number has quietly been doing what numbers do when you leave them alone and keep feeding them in the right direction. You close the laptop, go to bed, and it's only as you're drifting off that you realize you haven't checked the balance out of fear in a long time. You've just been checking it. That small, unannounced shift is the one that changes everything that comes next. The app opens to a number you have to read twice. 0. Not low, not almost there, 0. You sit on the couch with the television on mute in the background, some rerun neither of you is actually watching, and you don't say anything out loud. You just take a screenshot the way you would a boarding pass, and it sits in your camera roll between a grocery list and a photo of your dog. You don't send it to anyone. There's no group chat built for this. Nobody throws a party for a credit card hitting 0. It happens to be a Tuesday, which somehow feels right for something this quiet. 14 months of the same routine, lunch packed twice a week, the $80 transfer, the happy hours you kept showing up to, and it ends on a day with nothing else notable about it. You expect to feel triumphant. Mostly you feel tired in the good way, the way you feel after finally cleaning out a garage you'd been avoiding for years. That same week, up later than you should be, phone in bed, you open a real estate app without really deciding to. You're not looking for anything in particular, your thumb just knows the app. You end up scrolling listings in an upscale waterfront neighborhood in Florida, photos loading slowly because there are so many of them. Infinity pools, private docks, primary suites bigger than your whole apartment. The median listing runs somewhere around $24 million, and one place near the water asks even more, with a price per square foot that doesn't feel like a real number until you sit with it. You don't actually want the house. You're not delusional about the gap between your life and that one. You just wanted to look at something for a few minutes that had nothing to do with minimum payments or interest rates, something that felt like the opposite of the last 14 months. You scroll for 20 minutes, set the phone face down on the nightstand, and lie there a while before falling asleep. At work the next day, a friend who's been saving for a boat for 3 summers running asks what you're doing to celebrate being debt-free. You don't really have an answer. No dinner reservation, no purchase, nothing you're planning to show anyone. He seems almost disappointed on your behalf, like the moment deserved more than you're giving it. Here's the part that's hard to explain to him or to anyone else. You did the hardest thing and it looks exactly like nothing changed. Same apartment, same car in the lot, same salary landing in the same checking account every other Friday. The only difference is a single number on an app most people never open. And even that number by itself doesn't make you rich, it just means you've stopped losing. That distinction sits with you for days. The difference between not losing anymore and actually starting to win. You'd spent over a year with your whole focus pointed at getting a number down to 0. Nobody ever tells you what you're supposed to do the day after you get there. The relief is real, but underneath it there's a second, quieter feeling. Something closer to standing at the bottom of a hill you haven't started climbing yet. You don't know it yet, but that Tuesday, the 0 balance, the 20 minutes scrolling waterfront listings is the last day you spend playing only defense. HR sends the same email every October, and every October you've deleted it unopened. Open enrollment. This year you actually click through, mostly because the $80 that used to vanish into the credit card every week has nowhere to go now. And money with nowhere to go makes you restless in a way that never did. You end up on a call with a benefits rep who walks you through the retirement plan like she's read this script hundreds of times, because she probably has. The company matches 4%. You're currently contributing nothing. She says it plainly, no judgment in her voice, just a fact sitting there. You're leaving free money on the table every single pay period. You feel the specific embarrassment of realizing you've been doing this unknowingly for years. You set your contribution to 10% into a target date fund built mostly around a broad market index. She mentions almost in passing that the maximum someone under 50 can contribute this year is around $24,500. You're nowhere close to that, and hearing it makes your own contribution feel small by comparison, though she doesn't frame it that way at all. She just says, start where you are. That night, you open a Roth-style retirement account on your phone, sitting at your kitchen table with a glass of water instead of a beer, because you read somewhere the max for one of those this year is around $7,500, and figured you might as well set one up before you talked yourself out of it. You fund it with $200. It feels almost embarrassingly small, typing the number in, hitting confirm, watching the app process something that took less effort than ordering takeout. Your cousin calls that weekend to tell you he just financed a boat, something with a slip fee that sounds bigger than your rent. He asks what you've been up to. You say you started investing, and he laughs, not unkindly, and says that sounds boring. You don't argue with him, it is boring. That's sort of the whole point, though you don't yet know how to explain that to someone standing on a dock. You set a calendar reminder to repeat every January, raise contribution by 1%. It feels like nothing when you set it, one tap, gone in 3 seconds, but it's the kind of nothing that reshapes what your life looks like a decade from now, a decision so small it barely registers as a decision at all. A few weeks later, the market has a rough stretch, and you check the account out of habit, watching the number sit lower than what you put in. Your first instinct is panic, the same old feeling from the credit card days, except this time nobody's calling to collect anything. You close the app and remind yourself, unconvincingly at first, that you didn't put that $200 in to check on it tomorrow. You keep the transfer going anyway. Same day, same amount, whether the number is up or down that week, because you've started to understand the moving up and down was never actually the point. Nobody in your life is tracking any of this. Your cousin's still talking about the boat. The benefits rep is already on her next call with someone else. You're just a person putting $200 a week into an account nobody will ever ask you about. And somewhere in that quiet, unremarkable habit, something starts compounding that you won't be able to see for years. The mortgage broker, working out of a strip mall office, pulls up your credit report and actually whistles at the score. 812. He says most people who walk in don't realize half a percentage point on a rate is worth tens of thousands of dollars over 30 years. And you nod like you already knew that. Though the truth is you only know it because you spent years making sure nothing late ever hit your report. The rate he quotes sits at 6.6%. A friend of yours who missed one payment 2 years back got quoted almost a full point higher on a smaller loan, and you don't say anything about it, but you think about it the whole drive home. The house itself is nothing that would stop anyone mid-scroll. 3 bedrooms, a yard big enough for the dog, 20 minutes outside the city, nowhere near water, nowhere near a name anyone would recognize. You sign at the closing table and your hand shakes a little, not from doubt, just from the size of the number you're now legally attached to. The broker mentions, almost a small talk while documents print, that he's saving toward a high-end sports car starting around $156,000 before options. He pulls up the configurator on his phone, scrolling like it's a hobby. You look at it a second longer than you mean to. You could technically justify it now. You just don't want to explain a car payment that size to the version of yourself who used to sit in a parking garage negotiating down credit card interest. Your spouse has had a luxury watch bookmarked on a dealer's site for months, trading somewhere between $32,000 and $38,000 on the resale market because you can't simply walk into a store and buy one. She shows you the listing one night, not asking, just sharing, the way you'd show someone a nice hotel you'll never actually book. You both look at it for a minute. Neither of you says no out loud. You just move on to something else, and the tab stays open on her phone for another week before it quietly closes on its own. For her 40th birthday, she mentions, half joking, a designer handbag running around $13,500 for the standard leather, reading the number off her phone like she's reporting the weather. You do the math out loud without meaning to. That's most of a year's retirement account contribution. She laughs and says she was mostly joking. You put the equivalent into her retirement account instead, and neither of you frames it as a sacrifice anymore because it doesn't feel like one. It just feels like what you do now. You open a college savings account for your daughter the week she's born, funding it with whatever's left after the hospital bill clears. A few months later, you sit down with an estate attorney, a living will, healthcare power of attorney, paperwork you never thought about at 29 and now can't imagine not having, given there's a person in the house who depends on decisions you might not be around to make. None of this looks like winning from the outside. No car in the driveway anyone would slow down to admire. No watch on your wrist, no bag on her shoulder, just a modest house, a kid's college fund with a few years of contributions in it, and a folder of legal documents neither of you likes thinking about. You don't know it yet, but the version of you sitting in that attorney's office is closer to a real number than you've ever let yourself imagine. Thursday night, dishes still in the sink, your spouse upstairs running your daughter's bath. You open the app you've been checking since you were 29. Except now it pulls everything into a single figure. The equity in the house, the retirement account, the Roth, the brokerage account you started a few years ago almost as an afterthought. You do the math slower than the app does, like you don't trust the total until you've added it yourself. It's past where the typical American your age tends to sit. You've read the figure before, filed away somewhere. Households in their late 30s and early 40s tend to land around $135,000 in net worth. Tonight, for the first time, your own number sits meaningfully past it. Not by a little, by enough that you read it twice, the same way you read that zero balance all those years ago. You wait for some feeling to arrive that matches the size of the number. It doesn't come, not the way you expected. No adrenaline, no urge to tell anyone. You think briefly about texting a friend, get as far as opening the thread, then close it again because you already know how the conversation would go, a nice reply and a laughing emoji, and then everyone moves on with their night because nobody outside your own head has ever been tracking this the way you have. Your spouse calls down that your daughter wants you to say goodnight. You close the laptop mid-thought, leave the number sitting there behind a locked screen, and walk upstairs. She's already half asleep, hair still wet, asking for the same book you've read maybe 200 times. You read it anyway, doing the voices you always do, and somewhere around the third page, you stop thinking about the number entirely. Later, back downstairs, alone in the kitchen with the dishes finally done, it hits you sideways. Not as triumph, more like a fact settling quietly into place. You did the thing. Every milestone anyone ever told you mattered, you hit more or less on schedule, and not one of them announced itself when it actually happened. The zero balance was a screenshot nobody saw. The first retirement contribution was $200 and a closed laptop. The house was a signature with a shaking hand. Tonight is a number on a screen and a kid asking for the same bedtime story she always asks for. You think for a second about that sports car still sitting open in a configurator tab somewhere, and about the watch that quietly closed out of her browser months ago, and it doesn't feel like restraint anymore the way it used to. It just feels like a life you built on purpose. One that was never going to look like much from the outside because the outside was never the point. You turn off the kitchen light and stand there a second in the dark, and the thought that arrives isn't quite relief, and it isn't quite pride either. It's quieter than both, something closer to recognition. You spent a decade becoming a person you'd have been proud of at 29, and nobody ever needed to know it was happening for it to be real. The number is still sitting behind the locked screen in the other room. It'll still be there in the morning. Right now, standing in the dark kitchen, you're already thinking about the next thing. Not a milestone this time, just a quiet, unfinished question about what all of this was actually supposed to add up to once the milestone stopped being the thing you were chasing. The milestones were never really the point. You didn't feel anything close to what you thought crossing that number would feel like. That's the part nobody warns you about. The finish line never announces itself because there wasn't one. There was just Tuesday and Tuesday and Tuesday until one of them happened to be the day the math finally caught up to you. Somewhere in your own ordinary week right now, a version of this is happening to you too. A balance you haven't opened, a match you're not claiming, a number you're avoiding for no reason you could explain out loud. Tomorrow doesn't get easier just because you know this. The rent still comes due. The card still tempts you. Knowing the shape of the decade ahead doesn't make Tuesday feel any different. But you're still standing in your kitchen, the light's still off, and somewhere underneath all of it, one question is sitting there unanswered. What happens once you stop counting?